Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had said farewell to them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And seeing them struggle with their oars against an adverse wind, Jesus came towards them early in the morning, walking on the sea. Now, he intended to pass them by, but when they saw him, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out. Seeing him was terrifying to all of them. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, I am. Don't be afraid." And Jesus got into the boat, and the wind ceased. And the disciples were utterly astounded. They were beside themselves because they hadn't yet understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened so that they resisted God's ways. So the story that I told is from Mark 6, and it's a small little story that slips through the Revised Common Lectionary cracks. Mm-hmm. And it's a story that I even forgot about because I forgot that there are two different times that Jesus walks on the water. And this is the second one. And it's kind of like, it's just interesting. It's weird. Jesus makes the disciples go away. He dismisses the crowds. He goes up to pray by himself, and he sees that they're struggling against an adverse wind. And so he walks on the water in the most enigmatic part one of the most enigmatic parts of the Bible I've ever told. Like, he intended to pass them by. Why in God's name? You see that they're struggling. You're already separated. You're just going to go walk on the water just for kicks? And then it's a fascinating moment that I'm just wondering what the hell's going on. And then the rest of the story to me is just he tells them not to be afraid. And the disciples in the first story in Mark, they respond by fearing a great fear. And in the second one, the language isn't exactly the same, but it's pretty extreme. I mean, they're completely beside themselves. They still don't understand about the loaves. So this story is kind of like connecting you with the two different loaves, the miracle of the loaves and the fishes. So anyways, lots of stuff going on there, but I felt like for me, it's just a powerful reminder, maybe in going to Phil's, dying and rising again. If you've been out on a boat in bad weather, it can feel like the world is ending. Maybe even on the Sea of Galilee. Although if you're on the Sea of Galilee, you can see a lot of land around. So I don't know if I'd be that scared. But I just think it's another reminder in Mark's gospel that we see something that makes us scared. Maybe the bad news that Jessica mentioned. We see something that makes us scared. Jesus tells us not to be afraid, and we're terrified. Mm. And we see what happens later. That terror makes us say nothing at all to anybody. Mm. So I feel like maybe there's some echoes there.
Can you clarify? You said he walks on water twice. In Mark, he has two water crossing stories. He has a storm.
He doesn't walk in the water in the storm. Yeah. The minute I said it, I thought maybe that was wrong.
Okay.
Sorry.
There is. You can also say in other gospels, there's another story where Peter walks on water too.
There's that one. Yeah. But in Mark, there are two times where a storm happens on the sea.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
And there's a lot of fear around. And I just can only imagine, even to like when we're talking about Wes's story, imagining that happened when we told it so many times. I just don't know if we can really get into our minds. It takes a while to get into a mindset of how terrifying it must be to be on the ocean, on the sea, and the storm coming, and then a random ghost walk. I mean, they think he's a ghost, which I get. So it's like they're terrified of the storm and they're terrified of the ghost. And then the ghost gets in the boat, says, "I'm Jesus." idiots. And then the storm stops immediately and they still don't get it.
Mm.
And their hearts are hardened. That's a common English Bible translation, which to me is just like screams Pharaoh and the Exodus.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about the water crossing. Jesus behaves in weird ways in that one too. He's asleep and there's a storm going on, and they have to wake him up to tell him there's a storm going on. And I don't really know what's going on there because I'm a terrible sleeper and I can't sleep through a storm, but apparently Jesus can in the middle of the sea. But this whole like intending to pass them by, when you were talking about it, I've always wondered about that too. Why would you go by? They're scared. Go to the disciples and say, I'm Jesus. And apparently that's not enough either. But it made me think of times when I can hear my kids starting to either get anxious about something. You can hear like frustration, right? Or getting close to having a fight. And I may not go to them. I may not really change much about what's happening with me, but I am very attuned to what is happening so that when the moment comes when I need to get into the boat and say, here's mom, I'm there and I'm ready to do that. And I wonder if that's what he was doing, is I'm here and I'm as close as I need to be, but I'm going to see if they can work this out for themselves first.
Mm. Mm.
But then they spot him hiding in the waves and ruins it.
Well, maybe he said that in the first one too, Jessica. Like, why did you wake me up? This is a good nap. It was a good nap.
You know, the
those
last
naps
time
are really good.
I used to say to my kids all the time, there's only one thing in the world your dad hates, and that's being woke up in the middle of a nap. Why couldn't you be quiet for 20 minutes? They cut that part out of the gospel, Mark.
Yeah.
But I feel like, yeah, right.
He's like, wait till next time you're in a boat, and I'm going to get even. I'm going to prank you. I'm going to get in front of you. He wanted to jump out in the front. Oh, surprise.
and
There's
it
some
happened. Go ahead.
there's some interpretations of that he wanted to pass them by. That's what the presence of God does in the Exodus story. It passes by the people, and so they don't. Or when Moses sees he can't see God's face, but he sees his backside, and he knows that the Spirit of God passes by. There might be something like that going on, but it is a really weird and out of the flow phrase to figure out how to deliver.
But it's also like, it's early in the morning. There's just a lot of like evocative pieces of this story that I think just set a scene, not unlike Wes's story, that sometimes we don't take a lot of time to set this scene, right? And I feel like there's a lot of it's mysterious, and Jesus calls out with words from Exodus, I am. So like there's just a lot of it's a very weird story. I can see why the Revised Common Lectionary didn't include it. I also hate them for not including it. But
Well, and there's a lot of mythos of fear and unknown when it comes to the wind and the waves. I mean, we see that throughout our scripture. We see that throughout a lot of other ancient civilizations, that there's something about the deep waters that is an embodiment of fear for so many. And so the fact that this happens in this story, and then the previous one where Jesus takes his nap in the midst of all of that fear. I mean, even the baptism story itself, and this idea of going under the water to come back up. There's something there about encountering that unknown and unknowable fear, and finding God on the other side of it.
I wonder if it's the unpredictability too. You know, even today we can sort of figure out where hurricanes are going, but then they take some weird turn, and we can say, we just had a tornado watch here recently, like look out, but we don't really know what the wind is going to do. And we don't know, the waves are dangerous. Even very good swimmers can get caught up in the undertow. And we don't like not being in control. So I wonder if that's a piece of this fear, is not fear of the thing itself, but fear of our inability to do anything about it. And then Jesus does. And what does that mean?
I have a friend named Elizabeth Struthers Malvin, and she wrote a book on where part of what she did was she just tracked all the places that the stories happen in order in Mark. And it's phenomenal. I know Mark pretty well, but like running down the spine of it are all these sea stories. And so she says sea is liminal, which means it's kind of where things are up for grabs and we don't know that. And so maybe part of what being a disciple is learning that we're not in control, people, right? You want to be in control. We're not in control, right? And it's about learning to trust when everything around you is out of control and you're just being bombarded. The scene I was thinking of from a movie was a movie I watched with you all decades ago, but The Truman Show, where he's being hammered by the God figure in that movie, right? Is trying to knock him out of the boat and turning up all these things. And he's like, come at me, right? So I just have this vision of these storm waves pounding them. And of course they're frightened.
Well, I'm also thinking just that, like, if I was a disciple, the first windstorm would have left like a memory for me. Jesus sleeping and like what was going on. Then the second time happens and Jesus tells us, he's like, go on the other side, go away. I'll dismiss the crowds. I'll go up on a mountain by myself to pray. We don't ever talk about Jesus, the intense introvert, but I feel like this is happening a lot. And so get away from me, go away. And then they're in the boat again. And then another storm hits them. They're like, what the Jesus? I could see myself getting really terrified because I'm like, this already happened once. And Jesus seems to be pushing us away, but then he comes to us. I'm gonna be thinking about the mom a lot too, Jessica. I'm here, but maybe you could do it, but I'm here. I don't know.
I'm really noticing a lot of connections with Exodus, and I've only ever noticed one before. So there's the I am, which is reminiscent of the word that God says to Moses from the burning bush, right? When Moses says, who should I say sent me? And God says, I am, which the name that in Jewish tradition is not spoken, Yahweh is that word, I am. And the water and the terror and going from the side of water that's our side to the other side, it feels like an Exodus theme to me. And also the bread. So there's bread on both sides of this story in the Gospel of Mark, feeding of 5,000 and the 4,000. And so, yeah, just like there is in the Exodus crossing, there's the unleavened bread that they don't have time to wait for their bread to rise. And so they take it in the middle of the night and go quickly. And then the feeding in the wilderness when they were the ones who were hungry that needed food. So I'm seeing a lot of parallels here with that Exodus story, which makes me wonder if Mark wants us to know that God has saved us before. And God is doing the same thing again now in Jesus, in this story that has so many parallels to it.
And even if the disciples' hearts are hardened, or if they
that piece too,
or if they leave, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like Jesus is saying, or it's like Mark is telling us, there's echoes to this. Like this story's happened before, and if you know, like something, maybe that gives us a little bit of hope. Like we know this happened before and we know our God will bring us through or something.
Yeah.
It's comforting to know that God still hangs out with people who have very hard hearts, or Jesus does, right? So he doesn't say, you guys go on, I'll walk the rest of the way myself, right? He gets in the boat with them.
Or that their hearts are hardened and so he decides to get out of the boat. The storm comes back and he just walks away.
Right.
Or you all out of the boat. I'm going to ride. You guys,
you're on your own.
Throw Jonah off, man. It's Jonah's God's fault.
So what can we say about the fear in this story? Is fear useful for faithfulness? I feel like some people are afraid of God because we've been told that that's what it means to respect God, to be afraid and kind of keep God at arm's length. Some people are afraid of God because they've been told, usually by the church, that God hates them. And so that's a different kind of fear. So what can we say about this fear? They are terrified. As Jason said, there's probably 2 or 3 different words in the story that are, I assume, the same in Greek, but we translate them a little bit differently in English. So Jason said they feared a great fear. That's helpful to see how that gets reiterated in the way the story is written. But what is it? What is fear? What does that serve for people of faith?
Throughout consistently in the Gospel of Mark, fear is the opposite of faith.
Mm.
And I think a very good translation of faith, because we tend to think of faith as something that happens up here, but in Mark's gospel, it means courageous trust. It's not that you're not afraid, but in spite of the fact that you're afraid, you step out against it. But when you become immobilized by fear, Mark sees that as a problem.
I've heard the sentence faith over fear a lot recently, and it's something that really rubs me wrong. And I think it's because of that specifically, is that it pits the two against each other, which I don't think is the case, in much the same way that faith and doubt are not at opposite ends of the spectrum. I don't think faith and fear are either. Yeah, we talk about, maybe not so much anymore, but we are to fear and love God. And so faith is fear in that aspect. So I think it's more of a continuum than it is opposite ends of a spectrum. And I also think that there is some level of, I am afraid, I'm going to hand that over to you, God. I'm going to be honest about it, and we're going to, figure this out together. But the fear that holds us, the paralyzing fear that we talked about last time, does no good to anyone.
That's the old, what are you going to feed? Are you going to feed the fear? Because there's lots of people who want to stoke the fear and feed the fear, and make it bigger than it even needs to be in situations. And then there are people who, partly by their example, so it's what leaves an impact on this isn't anything that Jesus says, it's that he's walking on the water, right? That have the courage to do what it takes.
And I
Early
think
in the morning.
I
goes
want to
back
know how he starts the walk on the water. Is he trying it out a little bit? Is this really going to work?
And I think it's so dark still. Like it's dawn, or dawn hasn't even broken yet. I wonder if they can even, I think they just see a shadow, which I get that would be terrifying. But they're also terrified because they're in a boat and there's a storm. There's so many different terrifying things happening.
it's all really rational fear. And the story doesn't tell us that they've stopped rowing or stopped trying just because they are afraid. That perhaps even sometimes a fear like that will make you say, okay, I think the shore is only this far away. We've just got to go harder than we were before and get there, and then we'll be safe. Fear can be a driving force. And I think it goes back to that good news, bad news piece too. If we just sit in the fear and we do nothing, then we lose sight of the faith and the good news that is literally just walking up to us on the water.
Yeah, and I think I don't think fear, to your point, or to your question, Lori, I don't think fear comes from God. I think fear comes from our world. And what Mark's gospel is showing us is that God can show up in that fear. I don't think it's helpful to be afraid of God.
Appreciated the way that at the very beginning of the story, you set up a distance between Jesus and the disciples, and that distance never got closer until Jesus was on the boat.
Nice.
There was always that feeling of, in the midst of everything that's going on, there's this disconnection, or at least a physical distance between those who are afraid and Jesus being there. And it's not until that distance is completely closed that the winds and the waves stop.
All right, we are done for this session, but thank you. It's been a great conversation.
Always. Bye.